They were closing in on Grim Batol. Necros had known this day would come. Since the catastrophic defeat of Doomhammer and the bulk of the Horde, he had been counting the days until the triumphant humans and their allies would come marching toward what remained of the Orcs' domain in Khaz Modan. True, the Lordaeron Alliance had had to fight tooth and nail every inch of the way, but they had finally made it. Necros could even envision the armies amassing on the borders. But before those armies struck, they hoped to weaken the Orcs much further. If you could trust the word of Kryl, who had no reason to lie at this time, then a plot was afoot to either release or destroy the Dragon Queen. Exactly how many had been sent, the goblins had not been able to say, but Necros envisioned an operation as significant as this, combined with reports of increased military activity to the northwest, to require at least a regiment of hand-picked knights and rangers. There would also certainly be wizards, powerful ones. The orc hefted his talisman. Not even the demon soul would enable him to defend the lair sufficiently, and he could expect no help from his chieftain at this point. Zuluhead had his followers prepared for the expected onslaught to the north. A few lesser acolytes watched the southern and western borders, but Necros had as much faith in them as he did the mental stability of Kryl. No, as usual, everything hinged on the maimed orc himself and the decisions he made. He hobbled through the stone passage until he came to where the dragon riders birthed. Few remained of the veterans, but one Necros trusted well still rode at the forefront of every battle. Most of the massive warriors were huddled around the central table in the room, the place where they discussed battle, ate, drank, and played the bones. By the rattling coming from within the gathered throng, someone had a good game going on even now. The raiders would not appreciate his interruption, but Necros had no other choice. Torghast, where's Torghast? Some of the warriors looked his way, angry grunts warning him that his intrusion had better be of some import. The peg-legged orc bared his teeth, his heavy brow furrowing. Despite the loss of limb, he had been chosen leader here, and no one, not even dragon riders, would treat him as less. Well, one of you lot say something, or I'll start feeding body parts to the Dragon Queen. Here, Necros, a great form emerged from within the group, rising until it stood a head taller than any of the other orcs. A countenance ugly, even by the standards of his own race, glared back at Necros. One tusk had been broken off, and scars graced both sides of the squat, ursine face. Shoulders half again as wide as that of the elder warrior, connected to muscular arms as thick as Necros' one good leg. I'm here. Torghast moved toward his superior, the other raiders making a quick, respectful retreat from his path. Torghast walked with all the bristling confidence of an orc champion, and with every right, for under his guidance his dragon had wreaked more havoc, sent to death more griffin riders, and caused more routing of human forces than any of his brethren. Markers and medallions from Doomhammer and Blackhand, not to mention various clan leaders such as Zuluhead, dangled from the axe harness around his chest. What do you want, old one? Another 7, and I'd have cleaned out everyone. This better be good. It's what you've been trained for, Necros snapped, determined not to be humiliated by even this one, unless you only fight the battles of wagering now. Some of the other riders muttered, but Torghast looked intrigued. A special mission, something better than scorching a few worthless human peasants? Something maybe including soldiers and a wizard or two. Is that more your game? Brutish red orbs narrowed. Tell me more, old one. Ronin had his transport to Khaz Modan. You've seen also. The thought should have pleased him much, but the cost that transport demanded seemed far too high to the wizard. Bad enough that he had to deal with the dwarves, who clearly disliked him as much as he did them, but Veresa's claim that she needed to come along too, granted a necessary subterfuge in order to actually gain Falstad's permission, had turned his plans upside down. It had been paramount that he journeyed to Grim Batol alone. No useless comrades, no risk of a second catastrophe, no more deaths. And, as if to make matters worse, he had just discovered that Lord Duncan Centauris had somehow convinced the unconvincible Falstad to take the paladin along as well. "This is insanity," Ronin repeated, not for the first time. "There's no need for anyone else." Yet even now, even as the griffin riders prepared to fly them to the other side of the sea, no one listened. No one cared to hear his words. He even suspected that if he protested much more, Ronin might actually find himself the only one not going. As nonsensical as that seemed, the way Falstad had been looking at him of late. Duncan had met with his men, giving Roland command and passing on his orders. The bearded knight turned over to his younger second what seemed a medallion or something similar. Ronin almost thought nothing of it. The Knights of the Silver Hand, seeming to have a thousand different rites for every minor occasion. But Veresa, who had come up to his side, chose then to whisper, "Duncan has handed Roland the seal of his command. If something happens to the Elder Paladin, Roland will permanently ascend to his place in the rolls. The Knights of the Silver Hand take no chances." He turned to ask her a question, but she had already stepped away again. Her mood had been much more formal since he whispered threat to her. Ronin did not want to be forced to do something to make the ranger return, but he also did not want anything to befall her because of his mission. He even did not want anything dire to happen to Duncan Centauris, although likely the paladin had far more chance of surviving in the interior of Khaz Modan than Ronin himself. "'Tis time for flight," Falstad shouted. "The sun's already up, and even old ones have risen and begun their day's chores. Are we all ready at last?" "I am prepared," Duncan replied, with practiced solemnity. "So am I," the anxious spellcaster quickly answered after, not wanting anyone to think that he might be the reason for any delay. Had he had his way, he and one of the riders would have departed the night before, but Falstad had insisted that the animals needed their full night's rest after the activities of the day, and what Falstad said was law among the dwarves. "Then let us mount." The jovial elf smiled at Veresa, then extended his hand. "My elven lady." Smiling, she joined him by his griffin. Ronin fought to maintain an expression of indifference. He would have rather she ridden with him. She would have rather she ridden with any of the dwarves other than Falstad, but to comment so would only make him look like an absolute fool. Besides, what did it matter to him with whom the ranger rode? "Hurry up, wizard," grumbled Moloch. "I'd just as soon get this journey over with." Clad more lightly, Duncan mounted behind one of the remaining riders. As a fellow warrior, the dwarves respected, if not liked the paladin. They knew the prowess of the Holy Order in battle, which had apparently been why it had been easier for Lord Centauris to convince them of the necessity of bringing him along. "Hold tight," Moloch commanded Ronin, "or you may end up as fish bait along the way." With that, the dwarf urged the griffins forward and into the air. The wizard held on as best he could. The unnatural sensation of feeling his heart jump into his throat giving him no assurance as to the safety of the journey. Ronin had never ridden a griffin, and as the vast wings of the animal beat up and down, he decided quickly that should he survive, he would never do so again. With each heavy flap of the part avian, part leonine creature's wings, the wizard's stomach went up and down with it. Had there been any other way, Ronin would have eagerly chose it. He had to admit, though, that the creatures flew with incredible swiftness. In minutes, the group had flown out of sight of not only Hasek, but the entire coast. Surely even dragons could not match their speed, although the race would have been close. Ronin recalled how 3 of the smaller beasts had darted around the head of the red Leviathan, a dangerous feat even for the griffins, and likely capable by few other animals alive. Below, the sea shifted violently, waves rising threateningly high, then sinking so very, very low. The wind tore at Ronin's face, wet spray forcing him to pull the hood of his robe tight in order to at least partially protect himself. Moloch seemed unaffected by the harsh elements and, in fact, appeared to revel in them. How long do you think before we reach Khaz, Modan? The dwarf shrugged. Several hours, human. Couldn't say better than that. Keeping his darkening thoughts to himself, the wizard huddled closer and tried to ignore the journey as much as possible. The thought of so much water underneath him bothered Ronin more than he had thought. Between Hasek and the shores of Khaz, Modan, only the ravaged island kingdom of Tal Barad brought any change to the endless waves, and Falstad had previously indicated that the party would not be landing there. Overwhelmed early in the war by the orcs, no life more complex than a few hardy weeds and insects had survived the horde's bloody victory. An aura of death seemed to radiate from the island, one so intense that even the wizard did not argue with the dwarves' decision. On and on they flew. Ronin dared an occasional glimpse at his companions. Duncan, of course, faced the elements with a typical stalwart pose, evidently oblivious to the moisture splattering his bearded countenance. Theresa, at least, showed some effects of having to travel in this insane manner. Like the mage, she kept her head low for the most part, her lengthy silver hair tucked under the hood of her travel cloak. She leaned close to Falstad, who seemed to Ronin to be enjoying her discomfort. His stomach eventually settled to something near tolerable. Ronin peered at the sun, calculated that they had now been in the air some 5 hours or more. At the rate of speed with which the griffin traveled the skies, surely they had to be past the midway point. He finally broke the silence between Moloch and himself, asking if this would be so. Midway, the dwarf laughed. 2 more hours, and I think we'll see the crags of western Khaz, Modan in the distance. Midway? Ha. The news, more than his companion's sudden good humor, made Ronin smile. He had survived nearly 3/4 of the journey already. Just a little over a couple hours, and his feet would at last be planted firmly on the ground again. For once, he had made progress without some dire calamity to slow him down. Do you know a place to land once we get there? Plenty of places, wizard, have no fear. We'll be rid of you soon enough. Just hope that it doesn't pour before we get there. Peering up, Ronin inspected the clouds that had formed over the period of the last half hour. Possible rain clouds, but he suspected that, if so, they would hold off more than long enough for the party to reach their destination. All he need worry about now was how best to make his way to Grim Batol once the others returned to Lordaeron. Ronin well knew how audacious his plan might look to the rest, should they discover the truth. Again he thought of the ghosts that haunted him, the specters of the past. They were his true companions on this mad quest, the furies that drove him on. They would watch him succeed or die trying. Die trying. Not for the first time since the deaths of his previous companions did he wonder if perhaps that would be the best conclusion to all of this. Perhaps then Ronin would truly redeem himself in his own eyes, much less the ghosts of his imagination. But first he had to reach Grim Batol. "Look there, wizard," he started, not realizing that at some point he had drifted off. Ronin stared past Malek's shoulder in the direction the dwarf now pointed. At first the wizard could see nothing, the ocean mist still spattering his eyes. After clearing his gaze, however, he saw 2 dark specks on the horizon, 2 stationary specks. Is that land? Aye, wizard, the first signs of Khaz Modan. So near. New life and enthusiasm arose within Ronin as he realized that he had managed to sleep through the remainder of the flight. Khaz Modan, no matter how dangerous the trek from here on, he had at least made it this far. At the rate at which the griffin soared, it would only be a short time before they touched down on. 2 new specks caught his attention, 2 specks in the sky that moved, growing larger and larger as if they closed in on the party. What are those? What's coming toward us? Malek leaned forward, squinting. By the jagged ice cliffs of Northuron, dragons, 2 of them. Dragons. Red? Does the color of the sky matter, wizard? A dragon is a dragon, and by my beard, they're coming fast for us. Glancing in the direction of the other griffin riders, Ronin saw that Falstad and the rest had also spotted the dragons. The dwarves immediately began adjusting their formation, spreading out so as to present smaller, more difficult targets. The wizard noted Falstad steering more to the rear, likely due to the fact that Verisa rode with him. On the other hand, the griffin upon which Duncan Centurus traveled raced ahead, nearly outpacing the rest of the group. The dragons, too, moved with strategy in mind. The larger of the pair rose to a higher altitude, then broke away from its companion. Ronin instantly recognized that the 2 leviathans intended to force the griffins into an area between them, where they could better pick off the smaller creatures and their riders. Hulking forms atop each dragon coalesced into 2 of the largest, most brutish orcs the wary mage had ever seen. The one atop the greater behemoth looked to be the leader. He waved his axe toward the other orc, whose beast instantly veered farther to the opposite direction. "Well-skilled riders, these," shouted Malek with much too much eagerness. "The one on the right most of all. This will be a glorious battle, and one in which Ronin might very well lose his life, just as it seemed he might have a chance to go on with his mission. We can't fight them. I need to get to the shore." He heard Malek grunt in frustration. "My place is in battle, wizard. My mission must come first." For a moment, he thought that the dwarf might actually throw him off their mount. Then, with much reluctance, Malek nodded his head, calling, "I'll do what I can, wizard. If an opening presents itself, we'll try for the shore. I'll drop you off, and that'll be the end of it between us." Agreed. They spoke no more, for at that point, the 2 opposing forces reached one another. The swifter, more agile griffins darted about the dragons, quickly frustrating the lesser one. However burdened as they were by extra weight, the animals ridden by Ronin and the others could not maneuver quite so fast as usual. A massive paw with razor talons nearly swiped Falstad and Verisa, and a wing barely missed clipping Duncan and the dwarf with him. The paladin and his companion continued to fly much too close, as if they sought to take on one dragon in some bizarre sort of hand-to-hand combat. With some effort, Malek removed his storm hammer, waving it about and shouting like someone who had just set his hair on fire. Ronin hoped that the dwarf would not forget his promise in the heat of battle. The second dragon came down, unfortunately choosing Falstad and Verisa for his main target. Falstad urged his griffin on, but the wings could not beat fast enough, with the elf in tow. The huge orc urged his reptilian partner on, with murderous cries and mad swings of his monstrous axe. Ronin gritted his teeth. He could not just let them perish, especially the ranger. Moloch, go after the larger one. We've got to help them. Eager as he was to obey, the scarred dwarf recalled Ronin's earlier demand. What about your precious mission? Just go. A huge grin spread over Moloch's visage. He gave a yell that sent every nerve in the mage's body back into shock, then steered the griffin toward the dragon. Behind them, Ronin ready to spell. They had only moments before the crimson leviathan would reach Verisa. Falstad brought his mount around in a sudden arc that startled the dragon rider. The great behemoth soared past, unable to match the maneuverability of its smaller rival. Hold tight, wizard. Moloch's griffin dove almost straight down. Try not to let base fears overwhelm him. Ronin went over the last segment of his spell. Now, if he could manage enough breaths to cast it. The dwarf let out a war cry that brought the attention of the orc. Brow furrowing, the grotesque figure twisted around so as to meet his new foe. Stormhammer briefly met battle axe. A shower of sparks nearly caused the wizard to lose his grip. The griffin squawked in surprise and pain. Moloch nearly toppled from his seat. Their mount reacted quickest, racing higher into the sky, nearly into the thickening clouds above. Moloch readjusted his seating. By the Aerie, did you see that? Few weapons or their wielders can stand against a Stormhammer. This will be a fascinating match. Let me try something first. The dwarf's expression darkened. Magic? Where's the honor and courage in that? How can you battle that orc if the dragon won't let you near again? We got lucky once. Alright, so as long as you don't steal the battle. Ronin made no promises, mostly because he hoped to do just that. He stared at the dragon, which had quickly followed them up, muttering the words of power. At the last moment, the wizard glanced at the clouds above. A single bolt of lightning shot down, striking at the pursuing giant. It hit the dragon full on, but the effects were not what Ronin had hoped. The creature's entire form shimmered from wingtip to wingtip, and the beast let out a furious shriek. The beast did not plummet from the heavens. In fact, even the orc, who no doubt suffered great, did nothing more than slump forward momentarily in his seat. Disappointed, the wizard had to console himself that at least he had stunned the massive creature. It also occurred to him that now neither he nor Verisa were in any immediate danger. The dragon struggled just to keep itself aloft. Ronin put a hand on Moloch's shoulder. To the shore, quickly now. Are you daft, wizard? What about the battle that you just told me to? Now. More likely because he wanted to be rid of his exasperating cargo than because he believed in any authority on the mage's part. Moloch reluctantly steered his griffin away again. Searching around, the anxious spellcaster sought any sign of Verisa. Neither she nor Falstad were to be found. Ronin thought of countermanding his order again, but he knew he had to reach Khaz Modan. Surely the dwarves could handle this pair of monsters. Surely they could. Moloch's griffin had already begun to pull them away from their former adversary. Ronin again contemplated sending them back. A vast shadow covered them. Both man and dwarf looked up in astonishment and consternation. The second dragon had come upon them while they had been preoccupied. The griffin tried to dive out of reach. The brave beast almost made it, but talons ripped through the right wing. The leonine beast roared out its agony and tried desperately to stay aloft. Ronin looked up to see the maw of the dragon opening, the gargantuan horror intended to swallow them whole. From behind the dragon soared a second griffin, Duncan and his dwarf companion. The paladin had positioned himself in an awkward manner and seemed to be trying to direct the dwarf to do something. Ronin had no idea what the knight intended, only that the dragon would be upon the wizard and Moloch before he could cast a suitable spell. Duncan Centaurus leapt. "Gods and demons," Moloch shouted, for once even the wild dwarf, astounded by the courage and insanity of another being. Only belatedly did Ronin understand what the paladin sought to do. In a move that would have left anyone else falling to their doom, the skilled knight landed with astonishing accuracy on the neck of the dragon. He clutched the thick neck and adjusted his position even as both the beast and its orc handler finally registered exactly what had happened. The orc raised his axe and tried to catch Lord Centaurus in the back, just barely missing. Duncan took one look at him, then seemed to forget his barbaric opponent from there on. Instead, he inched himself forward, avoiding the awkward attempts by the dragon to snap at him. "He must be mad," Ronin shouted. "No, wizard. He's a warrior." Ronin did not understand the dwarf's subdued, respectful tone until he saw Duncan, legs and one arm wrapped tight around the reptilian neck, draw his gleaming blade. Behind the paladin, the orc slowly crawled forward, a murderous red glare in his eyes. "We've got to do something. Get me nearer," Ronin demanded. "Too late, human. There are some epic songs meant to be." The dragon did not try to shake Duncan free, no doubt in order to avoid doing the same to its handler. The orc moved with more assurance than the knight, quickly coming within range of a strike. Duncan sat nearly at the back of the beast's head. He raised his long sword up, clearly intending to plunge it in at the base, where the spine met the skull. The orc swung first. The axe bit into Lord Centaurus' back, cutting through the thinner chainmail the man had chosen for the journey. Duncan did not cry out, but he fell forward, nearly losing his sword. Only at last did he retain his hold. The knight managed to press the point against the spot intended, but his strength clearly began to give out. The orc raised his axe again. Ronin cast the first spell to come to mind. A flash of light, as intense as the sun, burst before the eyes of the orc. With a startled cry, he fell back, losing both his grip on his weapon and his seating. The desperate warrior fumbled for some sort of hold, failed, and dropped over the side of the dragon's neck, screaming. The wizard immediately turned his worried gaze back to the paladin, who stared back at him with what Ronin almost thought a mixture of gratitude and respect. His back a spreading stain of deep red, Duncan yet managed to straighten, lifting his sword hilt up as high as he could. The dragon realized at last that he had no reason to remain still any longer, began to dip. Lord Duncan Centaurus rammed the blade deep into the soft area between neck and skull, burying his blade halfway into the Leviathan. The red beast twitched uncontrollably. Ichor shot forth from the wound, so hot it scalded the paladin. He slipped back, lost hold. "To him, damn it," Ronin demanded of Moloch. "To him." The dwarf obeyed, but Ronin knew they would never reach Duncan in time. From across the way, he saw another griffin soar near, Falstad and Verisa. Even with so much weight already upon his mount, the lead rider hoped to somehow rescue the paladin. For a moment, it seemed as if they would. Falstad's griffin neared the teetering warrior. Duncan looked up, first at Ronin, then at Falstad and Verisa. He shook his head and slumped forward, rolling off the shrieking dragon. "No!" Ronin stretched a hand toward the distant figure. He knew that Lord Centaurus had already died, that only a corpse had fallen. But the sight stirred up all the misgivings and failures of the wizard's last mission. His fear had come to pass now. Now he had already lost one of those with him, even if Duncan had invited himself along. Look out. Malek's sudden warning stirred him from his reverie. He looked up to see the dragon, still aloft despite its death throes, spinning wildly about. The gargantuan wings fluttered everywhere, moving almost at random. Falstad barely got his own beast out of range of one. And too late, Ronin realized that this time he and Malek would not escape a blow by the other. "Pull up, you blasted beast," roared Malek. "Pull." The wing struck them full force, ripping the mage from his seat. He heard the dwarf scream and the griffin squawk. Stunned, Ronin barely realized that for a moment at least, he flew higher into the sky. Then gravity took over, and the half-conscious wizard began to descend, rapidly. He needed to cast a spell, some spell. Try as he might, however, Ronin could not concentrate enough to even recall the first words. A part of him knew that this time he would surely die. Darkness overwhelmed him, but an unnatural darkness. Ronin wondered if perhaps he was blacking out. However, from the darkness suddenly came a booming voice, one that struck a distant chord in his memory. "I have you again, little one. Never fear, never fear." A reptilian paw so great that Ronin did not even feel the palm of the enveloped wizard.